All right, good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Project Management in Research Administration. We'd like to take a moment to have you take a look at our land acknowledgement statement. Alrighty, and then our presenters today, we have Laurie Clark, Nicole Cox, and Valerie Keim. I will let you take it away.
First, since I had the slide. I'll go ahead and do them, just click down. So hello, my name is Laurie Clark. I'm a research administrator, primarily pre-award at the University of Arizona in the College of Veterinary Medicine. I have 7 years of research administration experience, and I just got my CRA in the fall. Yay. We had a great training at U of A. And next up is Nicole.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am Nicole Cox. I am a senior grant coordinator at ASU Decision Theater. Previously, I was in the central office for about 3 years, where Val was my supervisor. So collectively, I have about 7 years of experience in research administration and project support. That started when I was a student worker over at Decision Theater before I came to the central office. My expertise is primarily in pre-award, and then in my education experience, I have a master's in global technology and development, and I will be starting a PhD program in the fall on science and technology policy. And my fun fact is that I have attended every Taylor Swift tour for the past 13 years. So a big Swiftie over here. Thank you. I love that got applause. Wow.
Hi, everyone. I'm Val Keim, and I like to tell anybody I supervise, I don't let you get too far, even when you leave. So I'm happy to be partnering with Nicole here today and Laurie as well. I work for the Arizona State University Research Operations. I am the Research Operations Manager, which is a new position to our unit within ASU. I have 11 years of pre-award experience. I've been at ASU, it'll be 8 years this summer. So prior to coming to ASU, I was the grant person at the Maricopa County Superintendent's Office, which means I was helping write grants and submit grants and then explaining why we wrote what we did when we got the grants. And I didn't actually know research administration was a field until 3.5 years later when I arrived at ASU. So I started as a grant writer and then formally became an RA. And now I am working more in the post-award space, but not like, I'm not a post-award RA. I'm really more of project management, which is what we're here to talk about today. And my fun fact is I first got my passport in 2010, but I didn't actually use it until I had to renew my passport. And my uncle took me to Niagara Falls in 2022. So I'll hand it over to Laurie.
Thank you. So my hot take is that anyone doing research administration is already doing project management. And I say that as a former project manager. One thing I didn't say in my introduction is prior to research administration, I had never heard of research administration. And I spent an entire career in the design and construction industry, primarily as a project manager. But I was able to easily transition to research administration because I had a lot of skills that easily translated, primarily in project management. So project management is used in industry a lot for very complex, large projects. Design and construction, obviously buildings are complicated and a big team to make a building happen. And so every project I ever worked on had a project manager. Often it was me. Software is another industry that uses project management, and both are important because the projects are large and complicated. In research administration, we're juggling a lot of balls all at once, and we need to utilize project management skills. And I think that's really where project management comes into play in research administration. So I think there are some fundamental skills. And the first is subject matter expertise. So when you're thinking about managing a project, the thing you really need to understand is what are all the things that you got to do to get that project done. It's true that you can go and get a project management certificate, but I can tell you that if you walk into a job with a project management certificate, it may be the foot in the door, but you're going to have a hard time managing a project if you don't understand what you're managing. So as research administrators, we understand what we're managing. We're always fine-tuning our expertise, which is what we're doing here this weekend or this week. And we're always learning. So the more subject matter expertise you have, the better able you are to manage a project. And our projects look like a lot of balls in the air, right? We're like managing all these things at once. So I think that some of the formal tools for project management don't quite apply, but rather the skills apply. So the next skill that I think is critical to project management is organization. And I will tell you, I'm not a naturally organized person, but early in my career, I was working 24/7 all the time. I felt like I was working nonstop every minute of my life. And I started to think, well, this isn't going to last long. This isn't sustainable. I don't want my life to be work. I need some balance. And I don't know how, I figured out that organization was the key. And I figured out how to organize my work so that I went from 24/7 to 5 days a week. And I have never looked back. I think it's really critical to be organized in research administration because we manage a lot of things, and there's no way that any of you can meet your deadlines without organization, right? We all have different ways of doing it. And Nicole's going to share some tools that can be helpful for research administrators. But I think making sure that you're organized and that you have a method that works for you is really critical and will help you manage your projects. The last skill that I think is really important is being a good human. And that's because when you're managing a project, it may look like you're managing a bunch of paper. You know, we have all these forms to fill out. We have all these things to submit. We have all this stuff that we're dealing with. But what we're really dealing with are humans. And so the relationships are really important in managing any project, because even like in a construction project, what you're managing are humans. You're not managing bricks and mortar, you're managing humans. And so I think that having empathy and knowing that we're all trying our best and that you're working with people and you need a little give and take. That is a really critical skill. And, you know, we don't always do well, but we got to keep working on that one. So this is a Gantt chart, and this is very traditional, a visual look at a very traditional project management approach. This is called a waterfall method. And if you look at it, it looks kind of like steps, right? So it's a waterfall. And what's worth noting about this method is that projects don't start until the previous phase is complete. So this is a very linear way to do a project. In reality, I don't think any project I ever worked on actually looked like this. You know, there's some back and forth, but this is very traditional project management. In project management, there are typically 5 phases. And the first phase is, there's lots of words for it, you know, different industries call it different things. The first phase is called initiation. That's the information gathering phase. The next phase is planning. And that's when you take all that information, you start to make something of that information. You organize it. Next phase is execution. So you take that information and you make something. Then you got to monitor it. You got to make sure it works. And finally, you close it out. So there's another method called Agile. This is waterfall, totally traditional, great for very large and complicated projects. Agile is another method used in the software industry. I don't personally have experience with Agile, but I understand that it can be very effective. And Agile, if you hear of sprints or scrums, it's basically breaking a project into little bite-sized pieces. So you have little 2-week sprints where you start with nothing and you develop a piece of software. And then you continue to iterate on that till you get to where you're going. I actually don't think that this method or Agile work particularly well for research administration. There's one exception, and I would say it's little research administration adjacent, and that is actual research. So a research project actually would really benefit from this organization. And I think as research administrators, we're communicating with our researchers a lot. Very few research projects come with a project manager. I've scheduled maybe 5, you know, over the years that have like a study coordinator or somebody whose primary role is project management. Usually falls on the PI or the lab coordinator. I would say most PIs have no idea this structure. It's basically an organizational structure, right? Most PIs don't know that this exists. And I have recently been able to help a team get organized on one of their projects. And this example is using Microsoft Project. Has anybody heard of Microsoft Project? So at the U of A, it's free to us. We have to ask for it, but it's part of Office Suite. So I assume that it's free at ASU and NAU. It's very easy to use. It's very robust, kind of like any of the Office products, but to get the basic information in there, it's very easy. And if anybody would ever like a little quick tutorial, I'm happy to help. But the really cool thing about Microsoft Project is it will schedule dates and it will establish relationships, and it's all automated. So when you have a lot to do, this is a really good tool. So this is how I think of projects. So I think of a lot of chaos at first. You just have all this stuff, right? And the role of the project manager, the role of the research administrator is to take that chaos and make something smooth out of it, right? We got to smooth out that crazy bunch of stuff that we got to deal with and get it delivered. So I have some tips, and I think Nicole and Valerie also have some tips, but my first tip is develop a relationship. And I think that's been kind of a theme here, is talking about relationships, how important they are, because we're dealing with humans. We need to be able to communicate with them clearly and transparently and respectfully. And I always approach relationships with my PIs with kind of a heart of service. I know that, you know, I can meet them where they are, but truly it's a heart of service. Our research administration, we're here to help. So I approach it with that. Here's my little golden nugget. Whenever I have to deliver a project, I have a deadline, as does everyone else, right? So whenever you're working with a team, my opinion is that you need everybody to get on the same page with you. And so I always ask for buy-in. And I'm quite literal when I mean buy-in. I want everybody to say, yes, Laurie, we're going to do the thing we said we're going to do when we're going to do it. So an example in research administration might be working with a subaward and getting all the documents that you need in time. So I know in my mind, on the pre-award side, subawards are one of the big things I got to take care of first. So there's my organization. And so I'm going to reach out to the subawardee and make sure that I have them on board to get me the documents that I need in the time that I want them. So I'm going to say, dear subawardee, here's a project that we're talking about with some information. Here are the documents that I need from you. And here's the date that I need it by. And then I'm going to say, is that okay with you? Can you do that? Does that work for you? And that's the buy-in part. I want that buy-in, and I'm going to get a yes, I'm going to get a no, or a maybe. When I get a yes, I'm like, woohoo, great, we're good. And 99.9% of the time, I'm going to get those documents when I expect them. If I get a no or a maybe, then I'm going to reach into my back pocket and know that I have a little wiggle. So if I tell you I need those documents in 2 weeks, secret, I actually need those documents in 3 weeks. So I'm not going to push anybody up against the wall. I'm going to build in a little wiggle. And that's because we're dealing with humans, right? And things come up. And so I always try to build in a little wiggle. In order to be able to do that, I have to let my PIs know that I want to know the minute you're thinking about a proposal. I don't want to know 2 weeks before. I want to know like 6 months before that you're thinking about that proposal so I can build it into my workflow. So I'm organizing and I'm planning kind of constantly on the fly. But that wiggle is really important. And then my final little tip for success is something that comes from the business manager of my department. And she has a little saying in her office that says, everything is figure outable. The first time I saw it, I laughed, but I think it's so true. And having that little like idea in the back of your head is really powerful because things sometimes go sideways, right? But you can figure it out. And I think I leave you with that, just knowing that, you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You can look to your relationships and look to your team and know that everything is figure outable. So I'll pass it to
Valerie. Thank you so much, Laurie. So yes, there we go. So stakeholders, Laurie talked about relationships, and your stakeholders, it's the people you have relationships with for your project. Obviously, I know why somebody's important to me to help my project going along. But one thing that's really important to ask yourself is like, before you ask somebody for assistance or let them know they're crucial to a project, is like, why do they care that you need their help? You not only do you need buy-in, but like you also need to understand what do they need out of the project. So I mentioned that at ASU, I'm in a new position, and I've been immersed in what we call tier 4 projects. And these are projects with budgets of $50 million or more. That's $50 million. And so a lot of them are not what we've typically done before. In many ways. Over the summer, my boss and I helped create an LLC under our, like, related to ASU. Did not have that on my bingo card for like this decade to create a new company under ASU. And with that has come a lot of strange questions to people, and they need context. Just last night, Sarah Kern and I were talking. And I was like, hey, Sarah, I'm eventually going to need to talk to your team about drawing down funds. And she's like, yeah, no, we have a process. And I was like, yeah, no, that process isn't going to work because it's not ASU drawing down the funds the first time. There's like a whole thing with it. And it actually was the first time of me talking to her about it because we've been working on getting this thing set up for close to a year. about this time last year, Department of Energy started talking to us about these negotiations, and all the parts haven't been in place yet for me to engage Sarah with meaningful information. Even the information I shared last night, she couldn't act on it. So it's right, exactly. She literally, I was like, next week we can talk. And she's like, no, it sounds like next month's going to be great. So I'm not going to bother her until next month. So, it's important to give people the heads up of what you need from them for that actual project impact timing. But it's also really important, like from their perspective, you might be asking a favor of them, even if it falls within their scope or falls within their role. Like a decision was made that's impacting them that they didn't get to make. So if you're asking them to deviate from process, first of all, you have to have really good reasons why you're deviating from process. In my case, it's like, well, Sarah, our boss, is asking us to do this. So the buy-in's really easy there. But other times when you don't have like a reporting line within that person, or any other type of authority over like even their part of your organization, you really have to build those relationships early and often. I'm gonna ask Laurie, when you build relationships, do you start when there's a project where you need someone, or when do you start that relationship building process?
Probably the minute I meet the PI who I'm working with.
Yeah.
And I actually try to meet them as just a person, not that they have a PhD and I don't. It's more just meeting them as a human. And I think that goes a long way.
Absolutely. And so it's not only the people that are going to be working on your project directly, but also their teams. We have my go-to project is this one, Department from Energy one, because it's the one I'm like in the weeds on and have been for a while. But we have like a handful of people from our finance department that have been helping because there's been overlapping vacations and other outages and all kinds of things. So I actually have to talk to like 3 finance people, even though there's really one person dedicated, just because, life gets like, we have vacation time. This is a good reminder. Don't work 24/7 like Laurie did earlier. Plan your vacations and use your vacations. But, sometimes it's talking to somebody and their boss to also let their boss know, like, hey, we're deviating from process. This is why. And this is, by your person saying they're going to support this project, like this is also all the extra stuff that they're doing outside of their day-to-day. So it's really, really important to not only communicate with people what need to get done, but make sure that you're communicating with the people who like oversee their workload and are evaluating them, like just how much you're asking of them. Again, it's not like I'm making all of these choices. It's our institution has decided to proceed with this project, but it's really like there's a lot of people to do these complex things that are needed, but you really need to engage with them in a way that's keeping in mind that this is mutually beneficial in some way. And I say it's mutually beneficial, but we joke about how it's gross work sometimes. Like it's figuring out things that haven't happened before. And then it's also having sometimes some difficult conversations. So with some of these really big projects where I'm just meant to be injected in and then they get on their feet and back out, I also have been asking people, like, as they are in the same situation ready to back out, I'll ask them, like, off the email chain, just me and you, do you want me to invite you to these meetings, or would you like me to forget? And sometimes they say, like, ask me if you need help, but I don't need to be in the weekly meeting anymore. So it's also being that good human and that good partner, so that they have bandwidth to help you later, because they might. And then also if they ask your help, you should be a good partner and a good human and help them out too. So all about these leveraging relationships. So right now I have, I'm a team of 3 people. I have 1 half-time person and 1 full-time person. So we are small but mighty, but that also means when I'm working with a lot of people, they're not like even in my organization proper. So there's a lot of things that people call these teams, a working group or an ad hoc team or a focus group. I kind of had fun like with a thesaurus on this one, because it's a lot of jargon. And agile team, which is different than the agile project management process, I'm pretty sure, and project team. So a lot of the time when we're doing this, we're looking related to research projects, obviously, but it depends on how your institution is set up. I've been really lucky in that with our really, really big proposals, the way that ASU has the post-award portfolio set up centrally is it kind of depends on the unit with what people you're working with. And I've been really lucky that like all of these big ones, thank you, Pam Chapman, if you're listening, have been falling to the same team. So what's really great is like my agile working group task force has been hitting a lot of the same people, which can be taxing, but also means that we're able to have conversations to support across all of these projects. So we've been able to actually, work in the vacuum of what does this specific project need? What are the needs of this sponsor? But then also say like, okay, we know this, XYZ project is coming down the line. So is there anything, first of all, that we can replicate? Or is there anything we can take and adapt so we're not starting from scratch? Or is there anything that we should do differently on purpose because we didn't really like how it happened the first time? And so what we've been able to do, at least within Knowledge Enterprise on these really, really big projects, is get a lot of people in the room that always have had to support these things, but have never been in the one room at the same time to talk about the project. So it's been really, really fun. It's something that my boss, Heather Clark, wanted to try. And so we put a 2-hour meeting on people's calendars. We set an agenda. We said, hey, we're going to have an overview so we all know what the heck the point of this project is, because all of the scopes are really, really cool. But when you are on the administrative side, you often, or at least I won't speak for all of you, but I often forget the real impact and the really, really cool work that we're enabling to get done. So we have an overview of this is what is going to happen. And then these are all the things we know need to get done. And then these are all the things either we haven't done before, or we don't know how to do, or we know we don't do well. And let's all just sit down and talk about it and figure it out. And so what's really cool about these meetings is then we have point people within different departments. So we're not reintroducing ourselves every single time. Like, hey, Nicole, we've worked together before and there's this big project epics. It's just like, we kind of have our own language where we can tap into another team and say, I need to talk to you about this, and here's what's going on. And now because we're kind of spreading the love a little bit, we're then able to say, oh, I've already like primed this other person on my team to take this, they're your new contact. But because we all have this shared language and we understand that our agile team is truly agile, now we're at a point where we're able to switch out contacts. I'm not going to say seamlessly, but pretty efficiently for what's going on. So it's all about building that initial relationship. And again, getting the buy-in for like, why is it so important that we're spending even 2 hours? Like, why is it important that all of the people from each of these functions show up for that 2-hour meeting? And once everybody gets bought into the idea and is on the same page about it, it actually grows like really efficiently. And it's been exciting. And even though we have a lot of big conversations in those meetings, I think those meetings are a ton of fun. I really, truly do. So then another decision that has to be made, communication tools. There's a lot of them, and I think I missed some. And I realized a lot of the logos are blue or green. So like it's even kind of hard to differentiate them. But the approach that we've taken on these really big projects is by the project, it kind of depends on the communication tool that people use. ASU-wide, the university is kind of split between Teams and Slack. Nicole has some wonderful stories about how responsive I am on Slack. I'm primarily a Teams girl, and I miss my Slack notifications. But across these tier 4 projects, we've tried different things. So for epics, we have a team site that's been pretty effective for file sharing. But I know for our NSF engine project, because of some of the external partners, Google Drive, even though it's no one's favorite choice, is the choice that makes the most sense. So it's important when deciding how you're going to communicate, how are you going to name your file versions? I remember back in my grant writing days, we would have, date, and then like this was the AM draft and this was the PM draft. And then like closer to the deadline, it was like, well, this was the 11:18 AM draft. But then, you know, Nicole had the 12:05 draft. And then later, Laurie had somehow the 11:58 AM draft. So it's like, how are you going to do these naming conventions? Where is the single point of truth going to be on all of these documents? And, you know, like Microsoft products versus Google products, it's a real thing. If you're in Slack, Google integrates a lot better. But if you don't like Google Docs, then maybe Slack isn't your choice. So there's a lot of things to think about, but really the consensus is what's important, because you could have the most beautiful file structure in the world, and some people will still live in emailing attachments back and forth. And then your beautiful file structure just lives in a digital little graveyard. And so you need, again, like Laurie said, that buy-in on how are you going to talk to one another. So with these really, really large meetings that we've had where everybody comes to the table for 2 hours, we've decided at least monthly, 30, 60, 90 days out, we're going to meet monthly and have updates. And then at that point, we'll decide if it's quarterly. And we are transitioning into quarterly for some of these things, which has been really exciting and really wonderful. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Nicole, who will talk about more tools.
Thank you, Val. Yeah, so I'm coming at this from a little bit of a different perspective. I'm quite early on in my career, and particularly in my career managing projects as a whole. When I was working on Val's team, I was primarily pre-award. So my transition over to Decision Theater to a research department at ASU has been really eye-opening in things that I need to do in order to better organize myself and tools that I can create for my team. So just like Val was saying about all the different communication tools, we also have a lot of different project management and task management tools. So Val and Laurie, I would love to know what project management tools or task managing tools you guys use, whether that's one of these softwares up on the screen or just a list, a paper list, a calendar. So I'm gonna hand it over to you guys real quick.
So I really like new tools. So I've tried a few of these on here. But I will say my evolution of task management at the county, I was still paper stickies. And then when I came to ASU, my desk wasn't big enough for the stickies. So I actually switched to OneNote. So for my personal tasks, if I don't need to share with anybody, I actually use OneNote. And then for accountability, I have an accountability buddy at work where we share to-do lists through Loop components. So we can see how many things have been checked off. And then sometimes if, you know, if I know my friend's having a rough day, I'll like add things on her list. Like, did you pet your cat? Did you sit and enjoy your coffee? And she'll do the same thing for me, which has been really great. I'm looking here. I've used Trello for a minute. For one of my responsibilities at ASU is facilitating the change management committee. And we actually use AHA, which is not a product on here. And it's not available at ASU unless you pay for it. But yeah, I would say we're actually, as our little team, we're exploring software right now for not only visibility across what we're doing, but also like for our edge conversations, because at ASU we do evaluations quarterly, a way to capture our work, again, not going through email. And we are leaning towards Planner right now, which is Microsoft Project Lite, maybe. It's like tasks plus to do plus parts of project that doesn't tie as much to the budgeting aspect. And it's pretty. I like pretty tools.
So I'm similar. I went from paper and I was hardcore paper until the pandemic hit. And then I started working from home and have a little bitty printer. And I just thought, okay, I'll try and see what's out there. And kind of by accident, I discovered Airtable. And I love Airtable. It is my go-to for those who haven't used it. It's kind of like database meets spreadsheet. And I use the free version. I know you all have used the paid version. I'm just me using it to keep track of my work. And it's really great because I can sort on the fly and look at all kinds of different data in different ways. And I love that. I am part of an Asana team, and that is also really great when you have a big team that you're working with just for communication. And they have they have some ways to look at data that's also very good. I have used Trello, don't really love it for some reason. It just never stuck. The big P on there is Microsoft Project. Often, if you have it on your desktop, it looks a lot like Excel. So I'm always clicking project when I mean to click Excel. And of course, we all use Excel. But I would say probably my go-to is Airtable. And for my own personal tasks, I use the to-do list and Outlook just on a daily basis.
Yeah, Airtable is really, really pretty. And one thing I like about Airtable is you can upload files within the database, which is fantastic. And I will say, to corral all of our tier 4 projects, we do have an Airtable in Knowledge Enterprise. And then Epic specifically uses Smart Sheets. There's the form. It integrates with DocuSign. And so they have memberships, not this round of memberships, but they're actually going to see if they can integrate the membership application into the Smartsheet, and then the routing of signatures within Smartsheet with the DocuSign integration, which is exciting, but we're not that far yet. But yeah, I mean, Nicole, I know you have used quite a few. So what are your favorites, and what do you use? And why do you use things?
Yes. So the running joke at Decision Theater is that if we were to have a team yearbook, my senior quote would be, "I love a good spreadsheet," because I say that more often than is probably necessary, but it's true. So with that, I have used a number of these softwares, and I too like ones that are pretty. Recently, I have used Airtable. I did not use the free version, and that was on accident. And my department got a bill, and they were like, "Hey, why are we getting charged for this? If you're using it, that's great, but we just want to make sure you are." So heads up, if you do sign up for Airtable, if you use your institution email address, they might just sneak a little bill into your department. So keep an eye out for that. But Airtable is great. I have since switched over to Notion because it's what the majority of my team has chosen to use. It's a little less pretty, but it does get the job done. Jira is something that our software development teams at Decision Theater use all the time. They love the sprint format. It's not something that comes super intuitively to me as more of a pretty spreadsheet type of person, more so than like a coding type of person. But so now I'm currently using Notion. And I like to organize my tasks into boards. So I have them separated into priority levels. I did not include a picture of it here just because I didn't want you guys to see all the tasks that I have to do. But I separate it into priorities, and it's urgent, high priority, medium, low, and then things that are on the back burner, things that are upcoming, and things that are in the ideation stage. So this helps me also keep track of things that maybe aren't essential for me to complete right now, but that I'm interested in doing down the line or exploring if I have some downtime. Because as someone with terrible ADHD, I will forget minutes after leaving the meeting if I don't write it down. So having that board set up is really nice for me to be able to drag and drop in between columns as things shift in different priorities. I also like to organize it by projects. So at Decision Theater, I'm normally involved in some step of about 10 projects or so at a time. So being able to categorize by project then allows me to easily toggle and see what I need to be prioritizing on any given day. And as Val mentioned, this has also been really helpful for me with Edge Conversations, which is our performance review conversation that we do at ASU. But keeping track of just all of those little things that you're doing day in and day out, it may seem a little repetitive in the moment to make a task for like the tiny tasks that you're doing in whatever software you're choosing, but it really is very helpful to go back and see like, oh, wow, I did 30 different tasks for this project. And that can help you know how to better organize your time in the future. And then also report that back to your manager. And the nice thing about a lot of these softwares is that a lot of them have shareable or collaborative features. So with Notion, for instance, I share my Notion board with my supervisor so that she can just kind of go in and peek if I'm, working from home, if I'm up in Flagstaff at a conference, she can easily go in and peek and see what Nicole has on her to-do list, what she has coming up, how like heavily tasked I am. And so then that helps her be able to task me appropriately as well. So my next slide, let's see if the video is going to play. I had a video in here on this topic of not reinventing the wheel. And okay, well, it's not going to show, so I'm going to just use my words to describe it. When I started at Decision Theater, when I moved back over there after being a student worker, one of the things that we were dealing with as a growing research organization was that we had used many different organization tools over the past decade, kind of like Val was saying, different naming conventions, stored in different places. Some things were in Dropbox, some things were in Google Drive, some things were just on random laptops. And so one of my first tasks when I started was to make sure that I wasn't reinventing the wheel in project support for my organization. So what I mean by that is I wanted to make sure that everything was organized into one place so that I could pull from existing budgets, existing facilities language, existing scope of works. And that has really helped my team be able to take on more projects at a time when they can just come to me and say, hey, Nicole, I know you have facilities language for Decision Theater somewhere. Could you just pull that for me? So what I did was I created this really pretty spreadsheet that you guys can't see. It's color coded. There's different columns. It's great. It's filterable. But the idea of the spreadsheet is that you can basically filter by any field. So I have fields that are like, what sponsor did this come from? Did we have a subaward with someone? What was the budget amount? Has this been submitted? When was this submitted? So you can filter by all those fields. So say that I'm looking for an NSF compliant facilities doc. I can go into my spreadsheet, filter by all of our past NSF projects. And then on the far side of the spreadsheet, I actually have links to all of the documents from that project. So it's really easy for me to go in and pull from projects that maybe are on the same subject matter. Decision Theater does a lot of projects on heat and health and different vulnerability indexes. So being able to pull from that language for statements of work and project descriptions has been really, really valuable to my team. And so the takeaway from this is I would just encourage you guys as people who manage projects and support projects for your organizations to find whatever organization tool and method works best for you or for your team. I have the luxury in this sense of being a one-person project support team. So I was able to use a spreadsheet because that's what I like best. But making something that can be collaborative and accessible for your team to see all of the work that you've already done in the past can take a lot of the burden off of you when it comes time to start a new proposal, a new project, to kind of see all that you've already done. And then along that same line, my third takeaway for you all is to be brave and budget early. Some of you may not be in budgeting roles within within your departments, but something that has been very helpful for me was I created a budget template that makes the most sense for my research department. It's completely editable, it's customizable to the different project, and it's based heavily upon the budget template that they use in the central office. And why I did that was because we have so many opportunities coming our way as a research department that it can be hard for us to decide what projects to take on and what is going to be the most beneficial for us in the long run. So creating this budget template for us to use internally has helped me a lot to be able to explain the value of different projects to my people in my organization. So for example, I had an early career PI come to me a few weeks ago and say, hey, this company wants to give me $10,000 to do a project. Can you kind of map out what that would look like for me? And through giving him a quick budget overview, he was able to see that $10,000 really isn't enough to do the work that they're requesting. This probably isn't worth the time that it would take for you to write a proposal, submit a proposal, get a project team ready, because I mean, we all know $10,000 is going to do very little, maybe cater like a lunch. So things like that have been super helpful for us to see how far does $100,000 go? How far does $1 million go? What does that look like for our team and for our staffing? And then having that tool gives us the ability to kind of decide more quickly on the fly in the future. Okay, they're offering us $100,000 to do this project, but I know that it's going to take 3 months of this person and this person and this person. So I can tell you right away that this probably is not going to be enough money. So budgeting early and having just even a rough draft idea of what a project is going to cost for your department can be incredibly helpful for planning which projects to go with.
So one of the things that we're doing with these tier 4 projects is taking a look at what do we wish had been included in the budget? And then also like, what did we not realize should have been included in the budget? I won't say which project, but one of our projects, keep in mind, these budgets are $50 million and above, you know, for the most part, did not include any money for a project manager. So we're starting a list of like, hey, okay, so we definitely need a project manager, but like, do we need two? We might need two. Epics has the 1.5 project managers. And then we went to our friends in IT that do data management, like specifically for researchers. And we were told, hey, so there's going to be a lot of data to manage, and you probably need 2 FTEs of data managers. Guess how many we budgeted for? Yeah, that's right, Shauna. Yeah, zero. So one of the things I'm doing now is going through each of these large projects that we have, because apparently when it rains, it pours. And so again, it makes sense in the past when we have gone to other departments at the pre-award stage to say, hey, we have this like $70 million project, except it's not $70 million because it's a 1-to-1 cost share. So like, if we get this thing, how will you need, like, how would you support it? Do you need more people? And it just wasn't high enough on their priority list, because they're like, okay, if we get a $70 million award, like, tell me about it when the money's here. And then now the money's here, and they're all invested because we have our $70 million award, 1-to-1 cost share. So it's really $140 million project. And then we have our $90 million award that came in about the same time. And then we have another $58 million award that came in at about the same time. And then we have our engine, which is potential a lot more than any of those. So everybody has the buy-in now for like, oh, if we get these other ones, because now we have the momentum and we're starting to have that proof of like, ASU can handle these big things that they haven't done before and they'll figure it out. Now we're going back to the budgets, and there's conversations about like, every single time, what do we need? We know every single time we need at least one project manager. And what level of project manager? We had an issue we had to work through with our HR department, that for the Department of Energy, they required a C-suite. And at ASU, Michael Crow he has our president, a very specific idea of when chief should be used in a job title. So our HR actually had to go back and forth with the president's office over the course of 3 or 4 months to figure out how we can comply with this Department of Energy mandate that we needed a C-suite. We needed somebody with the chief executive officer title, when ASU doesn't do that in our internal system. So now we have a wonderful process, because Swissy, I keep looking at Sarah because Swissy's her baby. That also has a chief executive officer. And then our SWAP hub from the Department of Defense, and it has a pass-through nonprofit, that also has a C-suite. So now we have all of these real reasons why people are invested in getting it right at proposal time, in case we get it. It's not if we get it, it's in case we get it. So now we haven't had a proposal come through, but now we have that line with HR, because we had all of those really strategic meetings where the next time we have a budget, which if we get invited, the next one that's on my radar is for $100 million, so not small, to actually go to HR and say, hey, are we using the correct job titles and the right salary ranges? Because not only is the use of chief, which has been sponsor required in some of these projects, caused, internal disagreement among ASU processes, they also looked at the scope of the responsibilities and some of the job titles that were written into the grant. And they were like, with the people currently in these roles, the scope provided for these job descriptions and titles you used is not what the people currently in these roles at ASU are using. So when we're looking at paying people equitably across the job title and their scope of responsibilities, the grant doesn't line up with where it needs to be for these words that you specifically picked. So it's also like making sure you're budgeting correctly in the sense of like, will your HR department agree with you when you called this position a certain thing? And then again, we're going to talk to our data friends about like, hey, here's the general scope-ish of what we think we're going to manage. How many new people would you need? And how many people could we justify paying for this grant? So we've also talked about like, okay, well, we know like our swap hub and our epics are about the same timing. Had we written in a partial HR person where we could make sure it's allocable and allowable and all of the things to charge to the grant, could we have like one person split across those projects? And then of course the people in the projects have their one person and like, it's beautiful synergy, if you will. But also looking at the budget that way from like, what are some other similar projects either in scope or in size? Or like, what do your colleagues complain about when they say, my staff cannot take any more work? So we're having internal conversations about like, when should we write in research operations people? Because when is this, these projects, when it really does warrant one full person? Or can we cost share some of these things? Because I don't know, like, how much money y'all have in your couch cushions, but like $70 million is a lot to cost share. So we kind of have to be creative about where we're getting this money from to cost share for these projects that we have accepted and moved on with. So I would also say not only budget early, but also like really applying those lessons learned and really hearing about the resources that your colleagues have or don't have and what their priorities are to make sure that you're even asking the question. They might not realize that these projects could be a lifeline for them to hire a staff member or to promote somebody internally that they don't already have budget for. So it's really looking at these budget items to see like, not only what does this project cost, but like, what can it support in a totally reasonable way? Because it is expensive to do this work. So I'm going to be selfish and ask you, Nicole, when you are sharing, like you said, you switched over to Notion because that's widely used. How much of your Notion like board, is it a board? How much of your Notion board is private just to you versus shared across the team? Like, or do you report out in team meetings where things are and you update it? Like, can you talk a little bit about using Notion collaboratively and whether you have like your private part for all of your to-dos that you don't want publicly, like petting your dog or whatever? Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's actually a very good question. My Notion is primarily private. Like I said, my task board is shared with my supervisor, just so she can go in and take a peek if we're kind of working at different times, maybe not overlapping in the office for that week for whatever reason. It's been really helpful for her to kind of be able to just go in and take a peek. I also, I should say, Notion has the capability to have some boards be completely public and some boards completely private. So I am planning on using Notion for my personal planning once I start my PhD program. So that'll be its own separate private board. It'll be set up the same way and kind of that priority tier list. But nobody at my organization will have access to that. But the really nice thing about Notion is that if your whole organization or your whole team is using it, there's a feature kind of like Google Docs within it where you can tag people in specific tasks and kind of like ask them a question. So that won't give them access to everything within your board, but I could say like, hey, at Karen, do you have any information on when we need a budget for this by? And if all of your teams are working in Notion, that can be really helpful to kind of have documentation within tasks. And then we also use Notion we have like a collective DT decision theater Notion board that we actually pull up at all of our biweekly staff meetings. And it is also a similar like board setup, but it's looking at all of our projects, and it's broken down into projects that are just starting, projects that are ongoing, projects that are active in closeout, potential projects and where those are at in the process. And so we pull that up at all of our staff meetings because it's one of the few times where we have everyone in the room, and we ask people to go through and give us updates on the fly. So that's been really helpful for people to be like, oh, actually, yeah, we submitted this last week. Or, oh, that one's not gonna go through. We decided to move on from that one. Because we have so many teams working on so many different projects at a time, having Notion has been really helpful to kind of streamline and get all of that information into one place, so that then we can use it collaboratively at our staff meetings. Yeah. Well, that is the end of our scheduled slides, but we do have some time for question and answer. Laurie and Val, if you guys have anything to add or any other discussions, I feel like we could talk about this subject for the next like day and a half, because we all have such unique experiences, but I'd also like to open it up if any of you all have questions for us. She's got
Microphone's coming.
it's coming.
So I kind of have two questions. Hi, this is Erin from University of Arizona. I have two questions mainly for Laurie. But you know, you feel free to pitch in, you guys. So I recently did a sort of medium-large Department of Energy grant. And what I was wondering was, so you talked about building a wiggle room in the timeline. And so I wondered, I experienced a challenge on this DOE project where I had done exactly that. And then I had my principal investigator negotiating with me, whittling down the wiggle room. So my question to you is, how would you handle a situation like that?
I think I'd be really transparent. And I know I can be a little blunt, like I'll just say, no, that's not going to work, kind of in a nice way, I guess. But I think there's a limit. Like you need to know how far your wiggle room can go. And when you hit that edge of you can't go past it, I think you got to like speak up and say, time to talk about plan B. And, you know, that's just like that part of that can be enabled because you have the relationship and, you know, there's mutual respect and they know that you're going to tell them the truth. And you also know that they're going to tell you the truth. And if you have somebody that's like pushing the boundary all the time, you're also going to know that, but you may have just learned that on this project. So it's helpful to know like how people operate. And if you have a boundary pusher, maybe you need to give your like double your wiggle.
So allow a little bit of negotiation to happen, but still maintaining that wiggle that you need.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I may, can I ask one small additional question?
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that when this is so helpful because I really struggle with dealing with subawards on larger projects. But that follow-up question of, is this request feasible for you? Can you provide this by this date? Is this okay with you? When you get the no, absolutely not, what are some ways that you then
yeah, I
negotiate
didn't
with that?
speak about that. So if I get a no, I will say, okay, I'll think to myself, I'll give you half of my wiggle. So if it's due on a Wednesday, I'll say, do you think you could get it to me on Monday? And usually just that little extra, you know, it's a little give and take. Like you're delivering some grace, right? And so you've given them some grace, you often get it right back. And I find that it's just, you know, like if you get a no, you just say, okay, how about, you know, Monday. And speaking of back to getting to know like who you're working with, I used to have an engineer that I would work with and I'd say, okay, Ken, our delivery is Friday the 1st. A week before, I would get a call, like before every deliverable. And I get a call and Ken would say, we're not going to be able to have it. Can we have an extra week? And I knew this fact. So I always planned in an extra week for Ken. And that is just because I knew how they operated. So I don't know if that answers your question or, yeah.
I would add with the first question, sometimes what I'll do is I'll be like, listen, my comfort level is that first. So by you wanting extra days, let's talk about what I am no longer responsible for. So I had to do this quite a bit when in the central research office where it's like, listen, I have had internet issues today. So if you all want to submit this NSF proposal at 4:50, like I'm really stressed about it. I'm not okay. And so I need you to understand like all the things I'm worried about. But if you get it to me by 3 p.m., I can guarantee you if my internet goes out, I can go to another location, like I'll get it done. But because you're pushing it past my comfort, now I need to have the conversation for like what I'm no longer responsible for. And so sometimes that can be helpful too, because it's like, okay, either they're going to be like, oh, you're dealing with what? No, I want to hand it off and then it's not my problem, which is totally fine because that's how the system's set up. Or they might be like, it's my proposal. I'm willing to risk it. So let's see what happens. And, you know, I like to give people that option to make that decision as long as I'm very transparent about like, you are now asking me to do something in a way that I am not 100% I'll be able to deliver. So I can be flexible, I can be risky, but I would not choose to take that risk. And I want to be transparent about I wouldn't take that risk. And sometimes that's helpful too, because again, either they will say, let's do it your way. I hear what you're saying. Or they will say, I am riskier. I'm like, okay. Howard, did you have a question? Perfect.
I'm Howard from Arizona State. Question for all three of you. First for Nicole, as someone, you said you're younger in your career at this point. What have you seen or have you observed from someone else who's more senior that you've taken and you use often in project management? And then for Laurie and Val, what's one thing that you would suggest to someone that's new as far as project management goes? What's the one thing that they really need to focus on?
That's a really great question. Something that has been super helpful for me when looking to my peers and those who are more senior in project management is understanding that your PIs and your project team trusts you until something happens that may cause that trust to be taken away. But I think kind of going back to that being a good human piece, I think that especially within our organizations, it's in our nature to trust our PIs to do what they need to do and for them to trust us to do what we need to do. And so for me, it's been really helpful to just come at it with more confidence than maybe even I'm feeling in the moment. If it's a task that I've never done before, I can use my back channels to get the help that I need, but making sure that I'm presenting a confident face to my PIs and to my project team has been incredibly helpful for me to make sure that I'm trusted and respected within my role, if that makes sense. And another thing that I would add is that with that comes the ability to like Val and Laurie were saying, to have that wiggle room, but also know when you need to communicate with your project team if something is not viable. And in my experience, that can actually kind of be a sigh of relief for the PI. If you're able to approach something confidently and say, what you want to do is not doable within this time frame, within this budget, within this statement of work, sometimes it can kind of be a reason for them to be like, oh, okay, you're right. I don't need to worry about this. I'm going to go focus on something else. So my biggest learning experience has been just to make sure that I'm approaching things confidently and making sure that I'm garnering that respect within my role.
I would say I would agree with all of that. And when I was younger, I struggled a lot with like, I was in a very male dominated field and like feeling like I deserved the respect. And so I worked extra hard to win it. But I would say probably like my biggest thing is to plan ahead, get organized, and just to not carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. because I think we do that, or I do that anyway. But just, like lighten up, and you can get things done, and you have help. And I think one thing about research administration is we really do have help. Like everybody in this room is help. And so reaching out is, when you're stuck, just reach out.
Yeah, and I would say I was really, really lucky at the county that I had somebody that had chosen to take a step back in his career. He was, very close to retirement. And so he had a really big scope at one of the Maricopa community colleges before coming here. And so he loved to share stories of, things. And so one of the things that he drilled into me, which was hard because it was against my nature at the time, is also like, what is in your control and what is out of your control. Also, it is work. Like, we are not medical doctors. Some of us support medical doctors, but like, even though it's a lot of money, because we were working on grant applications, and like there could be a lot of money lost or resources not, like the patient's not going to die. So sometimes at work, when I feel stressed, I have to remind myself, like, what I'm doing is important. There absolutely are huge financial implications, but like, why am I treating this like somebody might be harmed? Because that's not the line of work that I'm in. And so between reminding myself that I'm thankfully, and it made me realize, like, I probably didn't want to be a doctor when I was younger, because I take solace in the fact that like nobody's going to die if I mess up. Between that and then really realizing like what's in my control and what's outside of my control. And then also just, you have to build those relationships before you have a reason to have the relationships. You don't want to like introduce yourself to someone and be like, by the way, can you help me? It's going to happen. Like, it's absolutely going to happen. But really, just as you meet people at this conference and other things, make a connection with them so that you're not just like cold calling people when you have to try to make everything happen. Thank you.
Sorry, yeah, you just reminded me, Val, I kind of have another burning question.
Absolutely.
So as a part of this experience, I related before. So it was a large project and you had sort of your technical scientific leads, and then you had your more, outreach community benefit plan lead. And what I found was, in the end, when we were sort of looking back on what worked and what didn't, there could have been better and more collaboration between those two entities. And how can we as administrators, or maybe as project managers, set that up for success at the top?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And that's something we've been really fortunate with in all these tier 4 projects. And again, I think some of it just is out of survival, because we had a lot of these come in at the same time from different sponsors, with a lot, like our swap hub stuff has to do with microelectronics prototypes. So now it's, well, is that classified information? And are the people like have the right clearance to be? So it's like a lot of complicated stuff. So we've been really fortunate to get that buy-in from people, as Laurie said, and have these check-ins. So we, within Knowledge Enterprise, it's all the administrative support units that do, these intensive 90-minute to 2-hour meetings, and then do, 30, 60, 90-day going to quarterly check-ins. And we will have, if there's a chief operations officer hired, which there hasn't always been, but if that project has one hired, and the project manager as well, we'll have them come to those. And so we make sure to have the people in the room where we can have honest conversations. One of the really special things about these meetings is it has become a safe space for, like, there are some people I wouldn't expect to say, like, I have no idea how we're going to do this. And I'm like, oh no, like, if you don't know. So also having those spaces where people can really be honest with those conversations to tease out the points that need to be addressed. And then absolutely, there has to, even if it's just a couple people from the administrative side and the technical side, and a lot of these projects also have that community outreach, like you said, with workforce development, even if it's just a couple of people meeting regularly to like share, like, oh, hey, this thing that we've been complaining about on the programmatic side, I talked to some people on the admin side, they're aware of it, they're working through it. And so it's just really, it doesn't need to be everybody coming to the table, but even having a couple of key people that is able to liaise between those groups is really, really helpful. And then, like Nicole said, then like trust builds between these groups. So even though we're having our meetings that you're not invited to, and then you're having your meetings that I'm not invited to, like we trust that we are really working out the kinks within our own processes with the goal of like, we don't want to get in your way of doing the work. Because again, that's why we do the overview of what these huge projects are. They're all really cool what they're doing, and it's really easy to lose sight of it sometimes. So I mean, with each project, that's going to look differently. But does that kind of like, do you know what you would have done differently in with that specific project with that? No? Well, then tell us more about it. Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I always think is you just do your best, right? Like that's all you can do. You do your best.
And I would add to that, one thing that's been really valuable for my department is we've been trying to be very mindful about creating the space for overlap between those teams of like the hard data science people, the administrative people. And so how that's looked for us is we've created this biweekly meeting called the Positive Action Research Group. And we are, sorry, Positive Action Committee, because it's called PAC and our logo is like a little wolf. It's really cute. But it's been a really, really nice and positive space for people in all different levels of their career to come to the table and say, hey, this is something I'm interested in. So just to give you an example, we had a second-year PhD student present the other week, and her research is in the psychology of space travel. And so she was able to present to this group of people who were from all different parts of the university, all different expertise levels, and say, this is what I'm interested in. And the benefit of that is it gets people in the room who may not normally talk to each other day to day. And so then they feel more comfortable coming to you with questions later on. And it may prevent some of that kind of last minute hardship. So like, I know that there are people who Slack me now to ask me questions on proposals and budgets that would not know who I was if not for this PAC group. So trying to create those spaces for people to share their ideas and their interests and things that they're working on can really benefit you down the line then when it comes to those project deadlines.
There's no questions online. Someone just wanted to thank you guys. It says, as a recent earner of a PMP, I love how you highlighted how much project management is used in research administration.
Awesome. Thank you.